So how long have you been dancing, and do you primarily lead or follow?
I started dancing in general when I was like 5, but I started social dancing when I started college in 2005. Not 5 again. Um, and I shoot for exactly a split between lead and follow, but I started out following, and I'm a much stronger follow than I am a lead. But I would rather issue the label if I could.
Why do you dance, and why did you start dancing?
I dance because I love music, and because when music is good and it is near me, I can't really help myself. And then I do it socially because it's also the easiest way for me to have friends as a grad student with no life. It's really nice having a weekly, monthly, socially structured opportunity to dance and like have human contact outside of the lab. So I started blues dancing when I moved to Chicago, because there were a lot more structured opportunities here. Um, and I'd always been kind of not sure about it. The Sacramento blues dancing scene was kind of somewhere between non-existent and skeezy, but Chicago there were folks kind of encouraging and being like, it's not that bad here, blah, blah, blah. So one more night of social dancing sounded good.
Now, how would you describe blues dancing?
How would I describe it? Um, awesome. It's an opportunity to tell a story collaboratively. And sometimes that story is, hey, we just met, dork time. Or sometimes it's a completely different story.
Now, where do you dance, and how do your experiences with blues dancing vary from one space to another?
Okay, so within Chicago, I dance at 2 different places. Bluetopia, which is a massive dance in terms of number of people, and then my little dance, which happens in a very large space, but very few people show up. And the main differences in those is I tend to dance smaller and more carefully and more, well, cautiously to keep my feet underneath myself and aware of things at Bluetopia because there just isn't room to do anything else. At my own dance, I tend to be more, hello, this is my space. I'm going to rock it. It's my space, and it's somewhere where I can take up as much space as I want because there's half as many dancers. But then, other than that, I also dance at, occasionally blues bars where it's even smaller and even less movement, and then it's, about the partner more than it is about the space.
Just out of curiosity, how many people would you say attend Bluetopia on an average night?
Conveniently, I have someone with that number. 250-ish. Yeah.
And this is all blues dancing all night?
All blues all night, but it's only once a month.
That's great.
Yeah, it is. It's largely a party dance for sure. I would say the number of people who show up for the lesson is somewhere between 50-ish, around 50-ish. Yeah, give or take 20. So it's a crap ton of new people every month, and then a handful of people who've been around, and a couple of their friends, and
yeah,
it's big.
So has blues dancing changed since you first began?
Oh yeah, probably a lot. Certainly my perspective on it has changed, but also just I think since 2009 the culture's become more aware of certain kinds of language. So I would say that, for instance, there's a higher prevalence of feminist language being used by academic blues dancers. In fact, I often find that there is a tendency towards academic ease that can be prohibitive for newer dancers. But I would say those are kind of the big changes, that there's like a strong formalization and also a um, growing tendency towards feminism as an underlying lens for viewing blues movement.
Can you tell me more about what that would look like? Or what kind of language is being used?
So when I first started dancing, there was really strong lead follow language. Like leads are going to do X and follows are just going to follow, which was definitely also like it was also part of the Lindy Hop culture at the time, as far as teaching language. And there would be separate classes that were about follow expression, rather than seeing that as an underlying part of the dance. And now you still see classes on follow expression, I think mostly because people are asking about it, but it's not so separate. Even beginner classes will have a touch about, like, they won't be, okay, follows just follow. It'll be, here are the things that are important to your part of the dance. Here's what you're contributing. So feminist in that sense, like equality and all of that. But on top of that, you also have more awareness of rape culture-y stuff too. So there's a lot of discussion about consent and how we can combat rape culture, even within like beginner classes. Again, this is how you ask for someone to dance with you. Also, anyone can ask for a dance. Also, you could ask people of any gender. Also, like all of these factors are things that are talked about much more frequently now. I don't ever remember hearing them in my first couple of years, but now it's pretty much all of the lessons all the time.
Nice. So how would you describe the dynamic of lead and follow?
So I would say that is probably the most cliched way to say it, but that the lead kind of sets up the shape of the movement, and then the follow fills it in with whatever kind of color they want. And so I feel like most people, when they say that, they're expecting, like, the notion is that the follow colors within the lines, but I don't actually have a problem with follows colors everywhere, explosion. Just that there is some structure and some respect to that structure. So you're not, like, coloring off the page. You're still within that really cheesy metaphor.
Do you feel that either role sets up any particular gender or power dynamic with your partner?
So, yes, no. The dynamic of lead follow is a power dynamic. Leaders do have a certain more level of responsibility and control, but I don't think that is fundamentally gendered, but it is understood in a gendered way in our culture that tends to have a certain expected power dynamic for the genders.
Right. So how does dancing with different partners impact your experience?
Vastly. So starting with as simple as, like, I don't dance songs, I don't dance songs about civil rights with people I don't know. I don't dance songs that make me feel sexy with people I don't know. I choose very carefully who I dance with based on what the song is making me want to do. And then it also depends on whether my partner also dictates whether I'll lead or follow. Because I tend to prefer to be the least good partner in any partnership. So I would rather dance with a follow that's better than me while they're following, or a lead that's better than me while they're leading, so that I have, this is like the most selfish way to put this ever, so I have this opportunity to grow and have a good time. And obviously, like, I dance with people who are lower level than me, like, full stop, without a problem, but it's just, when I can, I tend to seek out partners that make me have to try harder to be awesome.
Now, in your opinion, do people experience dancing differently based on their gender?
I mean, I certainly do, I think. Which is a funny thing. Like, most people probably don't have an answer to that question, being, like, within my own gender fluctuations. But, like, when I am approaching dance from a more masculine perspective, I don't tend to actually reach into myself as much as I do reach to the music as hardcore. When I am more understanding myself from a more feminine perspective, I tend to be like, well, here's me on the dance floor. And the music influences that, but it's more vulnerable. I don't know that that's true categorically, but I definitely, like, I have seen more of my friends who identify as women, like, have those dances where they were like, I'm about to break down at the end of this song. And I haven't had as many conversations that was a thing for my male-identified friends. So I don't know. I'm not sure that everyone... I would never, ever theorize that everyone experiences everything the same anyway. And I'm not sure, like, if you could statistically measure the differences between men and women's understanding of how the dance works, you would get, like, outside of each other's standard deviations. But I think there's a tendency to experience vulnerability more easily as a woman than it is as a man. Again, within our cultural context, within our world that we can't let go of.
In what ways do you express your gender identity while dancing?
All the ways. So clothing choices are one way, because your clothing affects how you move, and I choose different kinds of shapes and articulations, and I will tend to use my partner's space differently when I'm thinking about gender identity, so, which is really douchey, but it's how it is. I tend to be more within my own space for kind of defining myself in a more ladylike fashion, but I will get up in my partner's space if I am feeling more masculine, and I will be like, you think this is your space, but it's really kind of my space. And it's just like, that's one of the ways that I can help differentiate for myself and also express it more authentically, I think.
So how would you describe femininity and masculinity?
In dance or in general?
Both.
Okay. So I think in general, they are completely nonsensical words that mean nothing. Which is funny, but like, my nonsensical words, I actually mean like strong signifiers culturally, but things that we don't have to ascribe ourselves to, or get stuck with, or believe are how we have to comport ourselves, but that it, thank you. But that these kind of words help us to note certain kinds of classes of behavior and help us figure out how to navigate each other. I think in dance, femininity and masculinity tend to be broken down very much into general types of movement. So feminine movements being more flowy, more soft, more, I want to say like more whole body, but I'm not sold on that point. But contrasting with masculine movement being more tight, more rigid, more less flowy, but more in the lines of, I tend to think of isolations, like strong isolations as very masculine movement, and also big movement and arms away from the body versus tight into the body, less protective, which I don't see a lot of protective movement in dudes typically, but you do see a lot in some follows, I would say. Ladies. Ugh, language.
So what do you think the pros and cons of teaching gendered movement are?
Oh man. So the pros is it lets people experience dance in a very different way, and it helps them get away from like stereotypical thinking. So this is actually something that I think we see a lot more in Lindy Hop, which is if you teach a dude to do swivels, it will always look like a caricature the first time. Some 10, 15 times down the road, it starts to look like their own movement. And that's kind of where I think the pro is. If you teach something as an extreme, people choose the pieces that are the most appropriate to them and adapt them and bring them in. On the flip side, the con is just like straight up, you are creating categories of movement and applying them to stereotypes. And that can be really harmful. For instance, if you have someone whose gender identity is not standard, or if somebody with a standard gender identity feels like their characteristic movement is being maligned. So, especially in a culture that hates women as much as this one has tended to do so, having a dude who considers himself very masculine being told that something that's like one of his big movements is very feminine could actually be construed as an insult, which is stupid, but it is a potential harm that could come to that student. And that's not so great.
Do you feel you embody any feminine or masculine movements when you dance?
Oh, totally. Definitely, depending on what I'm going for, it's something that I make a lot of conscious decisions to do.
Does your movement change based on whether you're leading or following?
Yes. Often. Hi. Dork. But not always like along gender lines, but also depending on my partner as well. So if my partner is really amping up their masculine movement, I may either choose to match or contrast that, just depending on what we seem to be playing with, what our vibe is, if we're the sort of people who typically dance together, or whether it's someone who's new, who I'm just like, I've never met you before. I'm gonna match more to make it easier and like find the feel the same, show that I'm interpreting your movement the way you seem to be interpreting it.
Do you feel you accentuate femininity or masculinity for competition or performance?
So, I have gotten negative feedback in competitions for performing too masculine because I am read by basically anyone who has never spoken to me as exclusively female. I've gotten that feedback multiple times because in a performance it is easier for me to perform masculinity, even as a follow, because it's comes from a place of bravado. It's easier for me to be like, yeah, I'm a big, strong, tough person, rawr, and like be kind of showier and more out and big and performancy. And I tend to associate performance characteristics with masculine movement, but clearly this is not something all judges appreciate.
Now, what about from your perspective? What do you think about other dancers doing the same thing?
I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it until it becomes caricature. So I have seen competitions where dudes who, at least as far as I know, identify exclusively as cis hetero dudes will show up wearing a skirt because it's a Jill and Jack competition, and I'm just like, yeah, that's classy. So that's not so great. But I feel like using those gendered box movements to help you interpret the music is entirely appropriate in competition and performance.
Do you believe age could be a factor in how someone might express their gender on the dance floor?
Sure. I'm not sure what it would look like, but I definitely think that there's generational differences in how we understand gender. there's generational differences in how we understand and accept or do not accept like sex appeal on the dance floor. And hopefully we would see different behaviors between, anyone who is in their mid-20s and anyone younger than 18, or alternate realities. But I don't know that I've ever seen that happen.
Do you have any other thoughts on anything we talked about or didn't talk about that you want to talk about?
Oh man, so now I know that open-ended questions are really terrifying. So one of the things that is really interesting to me as someone who, considers myself genderqueer is that dance has given me a lot of opportunities to explore that, and what that means in my body and what that means in my the way friends respond to me and the way strangers respond to me, because so this is weird because like I said, I try to strive for 50-50 lead follow, but at any given event, I understand just how much I'm being read as my perceived gender because of who will ask me to dance. And I am always delighted and surprised when a apparently female-bodied person will ask me to dance without me having asked them, and will be asking because they would like me to lead. It's a weird systemic thing that lead follow is still assumed along gender line. I guess it's not weird. It's an expected systemic thing, but it's strange to experience from my weirdo land place where I'm just like, but I want to dance with all of the people, and I would like it to be not necessarily also assume that you know my sexuality because you know who I'm dancing with. That's its own mess too. Sexuality and dance is just, oh.
Do you want to express some of that?
Yeah, a little bit. So there was a weird thread, a couple of threads probably, where there were dudes talking about how they didn't want to blues dance with dudes because it wouldn't be sexy. And I was like, first of all, if you think the whole point of blues dancing is sexy, maybe don't ask me to dance. Ever. Please. Because I only want to have sexy dances with people that I want to have sexy dances with, and I do not even... If you are only going out to dance with sexy people sexually, and that's it. Oh God. Just no. 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 No, 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 no. But there's also always a fear for me that when I ask a female-bodied person to dance, that their assumption is going to be that I am there to hit on them. That's less scary now. Less scary and more scary? I don't know. So there is a part where I've become slightly more prominent, and most people will recognize me as part of, Tia and Brayden. But there's also the other half of that where some people recognize the part where it's you can still flirt with people even when you're not married. It doesn't really end things there. And I don't want to be perceived as someone who's only asking people that I think are cute to dance. Whether or not that actually happens or not gonna say. But still, I would like the perception to be that we ask people to dance because we want them to feel welcome and part of our community, and to not have that tied up and conflicted with, is that person bisexual or what is happening here? That shouldn't even have to come into question unless you're, trying to take that person to bed.
Do you have any thoughts on ambi dancing or switch dancing?
I love switch dances. I just had a really great one at Nevermore with Lainey in the slow dance competition, and it was fantastic. And And we had a couple of people being like, I didn't even see the switch happen, and then suddenly Lainey was leading, and I was like, I know, it was great. I think I have mixed feelings about ambi dancing as a culture, I guess, and as a like teaching philosophy. I think there's something to be said about learning one role first. I have complex, not well thought out feelings about ambi dancing, and I don't know how much of them are because I learned how to dance in this like I learned how to follow for a certain amount of time, and then I started learning how to lead, and then doing both at the same time is really different, I think. But I don't know, like, did that difference help me, or did it harm me? And there's a lot of good thought, I think, behind the, like, how do you know which role you would prefer if you have never danced before? Well, you won't. You would probably just follow along gender lines because that's what most of the people in the room will be doing. And it's hard to fight something like that. So I think there's some good to be had there, but I'm not convinced everybody needs to learn all of the roles from the beginning. And I'm not sure how that changes your progression as a learner. And as someone vaguely interested in education and learning science, it's a little, I don't know, it's untested, I feel like. And like the people who are starting to do it are going to have interesting reports back to the rest of us later, I think. But right now,
as a blues dance teacher, are there any like philosophies around gender you really try to bring into your classes or anything like that?
So at least in my classes, I always use gender neutral terms for who I'm talking about, who I'm talking to, and who they could be dancing with. So it's a lot of they. Make sure you put your partner's hand on their whatever. And I do make sure that the folks in my class feel free to choose whatever role they want to. So my weekly class right now has been extraordinarily lead heavy because I have one woman who only wants to lead and like 4 men showing up on a weekly basis, and occasionally we get a woman who wants to follow, but mostly the dudes have just been doing switch, which has worked to some extent, but I haven't had too many opportunities to explore gender in my classes, but I try to at least use language that's neutral when I am talking about leads and follows. I would never ever say ladies and gentlemen in my class, because why? I mean, I'm very high guys, but guys I feel has kind of become part of our vocabulary as a very gender neutral group of people term.